Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very final webinar of the year with Flexa. I know many of you that have signed up will have joined some of our previous ones, but if you haven't, just very quickly, by way of introduction, I'm Molly. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of Flexa, and Flexa is the platform where companies get discovered for what makes them unique. So we're used by over 4.3 million people all over the world to find companies based on what they really care about. That could be anything from hybrid working through to career progression, autonomous cultures, dog-friendly offices, you name it, you can find it on Flexa. And I am absolutely delighted to be hosting a really interesting look back on 2025 webinar. It's obviously been quite a challenging year for many people. From a job hunting perspective, it's been incredibly difficult. But also from a massive shift in the way that we work and what people want, it's also been fascinating. We will be talking through lots of different trends that we've seen in terms of shifts in data. And that all comes from the data that we have collected at Flexa. So over the duration of the last sort of 3 or so years, we have had over 53 million searches be conducted on Flexa. And that is for all of those really interesting things from location flexibility, hours flexibility, benefits, big career motivators. So we obviously see big swings and changes in terms of what people are looking for and what people value in their next career. So we'll be talking through some of the big ones over the last sort of 12 months as a look back. But as just a little spoiler alert, probably the two most interesting things that we've seen, and I think will be a bit of a common theme as we talk through over the next hour. One is this theme of realism. Naturally, because the job market has been pretty tough, people are not totally dropping their non-negotiables when it comes to looking at their next company, but they are reconsidering what is really important to them. And we've seen some really interesting shifts in terms of tolerance, but also preference change as a result of that. And the second one is juggling, another theme of that. So I'm sure you've all read the news headlines around, obviously, the cost of living crisis, the fact that more people need to remain economically active, but we've also got, as a population, more than ever, huge caring and household responsibilities as well. So we've seen some really interesting candidate shifts and demand changes in order to try to balance or juggle work and life. So those will be the things that we'll be talking about. But without further ado, I would love to hand over to my wonderful panelists to introduce themselves and their roles. So Miranda, I will come to you first.
Lovely. Thanks, Molly. Hi, everybody. My name's Miranda. I am the Global Head of Talent Acquisition at Merlin Entertainments.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Chris.
Good afternoon. My name's Chris, and I lead recruitment marketing for Mars across our European, India, Middle East and Africa region.
Perfect. Thank you. And Mark.
Hi, Molly. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark. I'm the Vice President of Talent Attraction at Leonardo Aerospace.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Really excited to spend the next 56 minutes with you guys. Just some quick housekeeping for our audience. So we will be chatting through kind of all of the themes and predictions and a look back on 2025 for the first sort of half hour or 40 minutes. But if you've got any questions that come up based on the things that we're talking about, please do pop that into the chat. Very happy to answer pretty much anything and everything, and we'll leave some space at the end for the panelists to be able to do that and really opine so that you can get everything that you want to out of this. Please do also feel free to drop comments in if you agree with something, disagree with something. We love a bit of discussion in the comments so that we can obviously also bring that to the panel. So to kick off, my first question would be, if we look back over 2025, I would love to know what you've seen as some of the most surprising changes when you look 24 to 25 or perhaps into the future as well. What has surprised you? And Mark, I will come to you first.
Yeah, great question. I think for me, what surprised me was the applicant volume and the applicant flow around graduate roles has been absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. I think across the aerospace and defense sector, we have seen probably a slight slowdown in the volume of available graduate roles, but the volume of applicants is extraordinary. I think at Leonardo, we had 82 applicants for every single role on average for our early careers. But in most of those cases, we were so overwhelmed with the volume of applicants that those job roles were only live for a few days before we had to shut them down. So I think that's probably been my biggest surprise there.
Yeah, and I think I've definitely heard that across graduate roles in particular, I think there has naturally been a bit of a reduction in the availability of them, but obviously there are still the same number of graduates, if not more and more people are going to university. But I think that theme of kind of unmanageable volume has been the case across so many different roles, as obviously it has been a market where there is less supply than there is demand, which I think has obviously led to some interesting dynamics. Miranda, I would love to come to you second and hear your thoughts on what has been surprising for you in 2025.
Yeah, that's great. I think definitely the volume of applications we get, I would echo that. So we've had over 300,000 applications this year just for our UK roles alone, which is a substantial number. I think one of the big surprises is how we've approached that for this year versus what we've done previously for the years. So we've really tried to move away from artificial barriers for people to apply, focusing on X amount of years experience, must have a degree to deliver this, and really getting under the bonnet of what's required for that role. So really looking at the job descriptions and focusing on, is it, change agility? Is it being a disruptor in the market? And using that has then helped us diversify the talent pool that we then bring to the hiring managers. So very much changing how we approach it to get the very best quality of hire and opening up the diversity of who we potentially bring to those roles.
Nice. So have you seen that there has been an increase in diversity despite the fact that's also led to a obviously
Absolutely, yeah. So I think by focusing on the skills rather than the qualifications, we're able to get people that may have potentially not been suitable for that role prior into interviews and actually are a better candidate profile to be able to deliver, I guess, the new skills and the future state we're looking for in Merlin versus what we'd have traditionally gone for because you needed to have X amount of experience. So it's been a brilliant way for us to really drive our talent pipelines as well and engage with silver medalists that might not be right for that role, but actually could be fantastic for something else we have within the business.
Yeah, and I suppose that is one positive upside of having that level of volume is you do end up appearing in front of and attracting people that perhaps had never considered you as an employer of choice before.
Yeah, 100%.
Brilliant. Chris, I'd love to come to you for your reflections on 2025.
I think for me, volume is definitely a trend as well. But I think more interesting, Mars being a very stable business. We always need pet food. People always want to buy chocolate. They always want a snack. We always need food. Mars being a very stable business in that sense and having a lot of roles available at any one time shows that people really want stability. And we're entering that period now where you kind of said people are flexing more on their nice to haves, not necessarily being as picky as before. And certainly that has for businesses, maybe in FMCG, businesses in places potentially at retail that we still need volume in, have been unaffected, which has both pros and cons from a recruitment perspective as well. But it's really interesting to hear candidates talk about what they want as well, because I think that's changing. Yeah. We're hearing a lot less around I want this to I need this.
Yeah.
And that kind of language shift is really interesting.
I completely agree with that. And that's actually something that I was going to come to kind of later on about. There's been, if we look back at coming out of the pandemic and how people spoke about what they had as ideals in their career, they would often have kind of a long menu list of things, and it might be 5, 7, 9 things that they would like. And we saw that reflected in search patterns as well. People just tended to put more things on. Naturally, you're going to find fewer companies that match that. But what we've seen is not only this sort of, as I talked about, realism in terms of thinking actually what is realistic, which means that we've seen maybe 5, 7, 9 things move to more, maybe 2 or 3, but those 2 or 3 have become needs rather than wants. Which I do think is a really interesting shift. And we've seen that much more in terms of alternative working patterns with certain groups, in terms of obviously salary, reward and recognition. But on the flip side, what we've seen, to come back, Mark, to your point around graduate volumes, is that in the space of just 12 months, Gen Z's, and I don't like to say preference because I do think it's more of a tolerance than it is a preference, for 5 days a week in the office has gone up 3 times. So there is much more of an awareness that going into the office every day, if you are struggling to get a graduate role or you are just coming out of university, is going to be a necessity in order to get the other things. But alongside that, the other things that they say around non-negotiables are working for a company that has a good mission or vision or is making an impact in the world. So they're very happy to go into the office 5 days a week and work incredibly hard, but they do need that. And again, in their words, would be need it to be on something that they enjoy doing and feel is actually making a difference. So completely agree with that shift that you've seen, Chris, of going from lots of wants to a couple of needs. I suppose when we think about that and reflecting onto kind of company EVPs and how you talk about what you offer, we've seen that career progression has entered the top 10 of all of our kind of EVP searches in 2025. I'd love to know if you've seen that reflected in your own kind of, whether it's at very top level, employer branding, recruitment marketing, or interview processes where people are asking more questions around career progression and what their career is going to look like in the future. Miranda, I'd love to come to you for your reflections on that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think definitely from what I've seen at interview level, that kind of mentality of job hopping has really lost its shine. And people are really looking at what is the reality of being able to stay with a business and have a fulfilling career. So some of the things I've noticed, particularly within the interview space, is the time it's going to take for me to progress within the business. And then equally, what is the breadth of opportunity I'm going to be able to have? So if I'm starting a career in engineering, for instance, what are the opportunities for me to potentially move into production and working in there, and what would that look like? So there's, I guess, two elements of how we approach that. So obviously we've got on our careers website, our EVP, we've also started to segment the market. So for our frontline seasonal workforce, we're starting to look at those people that are doing their second and their third season. How do we introduce not just the park that you work in today, but actually the breadth of opportunity you could have with us? So it's not just a job for the summer, but a career that you could move into, particularly in that early careers mindset. And then from our salaried space, it's very much looking at how do we get on the front foot of that? So it starts with onboarding. And it's one of the great tools that we can use when we're starting to negotiate work offers is this is the investment that we're going to make in you. This is what 90 days is going to look like. And then beyond that, these are the job opportunities that you're going to have off the back of the work that you're going to be doing today, and really using that as a selling factor for those people that are looking for that longer term career rather than I'll be here for a couple of months, maybe a year or so, and then I'll move off and do something else.
And I think that, we lost Miranda. Hopefully she'll be back. It was very good timing, at least. She's back.
I'm back.
And I think that ties in really nicely as well with the interest in terms of people care a lot more about job security now, as they've seen so many redundancies happen this year and are obviously concerned about what that means for the future. So I think although obviously that does naturally build this sense of concern and insecurity, I think there's also on the flip side this recognition that a job can be for a long time, and one employer can ultimately be somewhere that you might stay for 5, 10, 15 years.
Definitely. I mean, I've been at Merlin for 12 years now, and I've really hopped around. So, there is the development opportunities there, and it's about actively talking about it and giving some realism to what that's going to look like. You're not going to move tomorrow. So this is future state, but this is what tomorrow could look like for you.
Awesome. And Chris, have you seen an increased interest in career progression, internal mobility, what the future looks like?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because this is ingrained in our EVP as well. So development is one of the 3 pillars of our EVP at Mars, and it's something that we're very proud of. I could count on my hands right now 10 people very easily that have been at Mars 20 plus years. I've been here, it's 8 years myself, and I think part of the reason behind that is the development. And I think really key, we're potentially moving. I agree with Miranda. Like one of the elements is around just the stability. There's so many redundancies. We're living in an unstable world, and we have a lot of instability in other areas in our lives. And so, if we can have that stability at work, that's really key. And I think anyone that's been made redundant, no one wants to go through that process and feeling again. So you kind of almost tie I guess, an element of what you're looking forward to into that. I think the second part is it's around almost people are looking for flexibility in what development looks like. And so there's a lot of emphasis placed on, I have stability, I have a company where I match the culture, I have a company where I'm rewarded, all of those things. But then we're also looking for this kind of squiggly career. And a lot of people that don't necessarily know what they want to do. And a lot of people that might not have the, I want to be this in 10, 15 years time. Like that question, where do you want to be in 10 years? I think is kind of now made redundant. We don't need that as much because of this squiggly careers idea. And I think development is a key part in that. People are now looking less for, okay, here's what my next 4 career moves are going to be, and into, here's how I'm as a person going to develop. And so we have development as a pillar, but it's not just about you'll do this time and role, this will be your next job, all of that kind of stuff. It's around how do we invest in you as a person? And so how do we get you to where you want to be as a person, whether that be the behaviours you want or just doing work that you enjoy. And I think then having, it comes back to that, like needs and wants, having the patience more in going, okay, so here's where I'm going to go, and I can feel myself getting there. I think that's a key. Is it's not I'm here now, I'm going to be here in 5 years. It's the journey more than, I mean, that's the most cliche thing I can say, but it's the journey more than destination, isn't it?
Absolutely. Mark, have you seen something similar?
Yeah, certainly when it comes to, I like the term talent preferences actually, because as an individual, there are some things you think, yeah, I'm willing to trade that off. There are others you're not. And pre-COVID, I think job security was not, it wouldn't rank on anyone's list. It was always salary or comp and ben, competitive comp and ben, work-life balance, and even flexible working was probably a bit of an unknown. That was probably quite at the bottom. And now we see quite often those 4 things of comp and ben or future earnings even combined with work-life balance, flexible working, and job security are probably those 4 things are what's driving most of the talent. But career progression, certainly something that is prominent in the aerospace sector. At Leonardo, they do an amazing survey every 6 months and get a feel for what the employee base is looking to see improvements on, and growth and development always comes up high on that list. And I think the key to that is probably having really good policies around internal mobility, because it's easy to talk the talk and less easy to walk the walk.
Yeah.
So having a policy such as transparently every single job is available internally for every employee for a period of 2 weeks before it goes external, that shows to the whole company, the whole business, that we take internal mobility seriously, that there are always going to be opportunities for people to grow and develop. And I think the more we as an organization can offer development pathways for people, and there can be, you do this role and you grow into this one, and then it's very, very standardized, but also provide flexibility, as Chris said, for those squiggly careers, so that if a very rigid development pathway doesn't suit you, then you can zigzag around as you grow.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be, ultimately a huge pull as people start to think about job security. With job security, I think people think of it as becoming maybe a little bit stagnant in your role, perhaps doing the same thing over and over again for a very long time and not having very much variety. Whereas I think now actually companies have a great opportunity to be able to secure a competitive advantage if they talk about, Miranda, Chris, Mark, like you've all mentioned it, in terms of being able to have that squiggly career within an organization, to have had lots of experiences at one company, because there are also huge advantages to that. Starting again, learning a new industry, a new company, new culture, in and of itself obviously takes a lot of ramp up time. But if a company supports that internally, I think there's so much that they can get out of people. It's also more cost efficient as well, because hiring people is ultimately expensive. We've seen some other really interesting shifts, and Mark, you obviously talked about those kind of top 4 that people tend to think about, and job security is very much a new one. And what we used to see was that culture was actually that 4th one, and sometimes it would kind of vie with benefits. And recently we've seen a little bit of a drop in terms of interest for exactly what a company culture is like. Now that's in part driven by the volume and the quarter that we've just we're coming out of, where Gen Z tend to care a little bit less about culture. Interestingly, I guess perhaps they've not had previous experiences where they've been burnt, so they don't necessarily know that that's an important thing. But I think also, to the non-negotiable and the nice to have point, job security is a non-negotiable if you want to obviously remain in secure employment, versus culture is a bit more of a nice to have. One really interesting theme that we have seen is that autonomy has become the number 1 by a very long way culture marker. So an autonomous culture is by far and away the most searched for. Whereas we used to see words like supportive or progressive or people first be much more important. And I would love to get your thoughts on this concept of autonomy. And I think it ties in really nicely with people wanting trust from their employers too. And if you guys have seen that as well throughout 2025. Chris, I would love to come to you first, but I think your dog is trying to answer the question first.
He's just run downstairs because I think the postman's here. He's always trying to get involved. I love that question, and it's something that is really, when I look at my personal needs and must-haves, autonomy is one of those things. If you put me in a job where you tell me this is exactly what you need to do every day of every week, you're not going to get the most out of me. If you give me the flexibility and freedom to design that, that's when you get the most out of me. And I think, there are both types of people in the world, but we're entering this kind of phase now where people want to have that freedom within a framework. And so, maybe it's not as far as Google go with the 80-20%. You've got 20% of your time to go and do something, which isn't necessarily part of your day job, but people are liking that and being able to build, because the world, especially with AI and things, jobs are adapting very quickly, and what they need to be is adapting very quickly. So yes, you've got this job description, but you could quite easily find yourself 6 months into a role and there's this lovely AI tool or something that makes that a little bit more redundant. And we're now, I think, able to use creativity and freedom to be able to fill that in. And so do we want to be doing productive work naturally? I think most people do anyway. We want to be doing something which really feels like there's a purpose to it, personally for me. And I think that comes from autonomy and that kind of freedom within a framework. If I look at myself and my own career, I think the last 2 or 3 jobs I've had are jobs where I've said, okay, there's this area, but actually, if we're thinking 3 years in the future, this is where we're going to need to be anyway. So how do we kind of combine them to make something new? Yeah. Not always the possibility, but I think that's where a lot of people get excitement from is being able to craft something in the world of AI and impersonal experiences. Having something which is personal to you feels more special.
Yeah, and I think we've also been through, as a collective society, a very interesting shift when it came to autonomy. I think pre-pandemic, I think everybody saw this sort of utopia of flexibility as meaning that there would be this trust, there would be this autonomy. And I think actually during the pandemic, where we were forced to be fully remote, and actually a lot of companies brought their workforces fully remote without actually giving them much autonomy or trust. And so I think there was this big learning of the fact that actually being distributed, having flexibility doesn't necessarily mean that you have more freedom and you have more trust to be able to do your role in the way that you think is best. And actually then obviously coming out of that, as we've settled into a huge variety of working patterns from 5-6 days a week in the office all the way through to fully remote, you realize that flexibility is not always a proxy for autonomy. And actually that's what a lot of people really cared about, wasn't necessarily the flexibility, it was the autonomy and the trust. And that's why they now know what to search for. Mark, I'd love to understand if kind of autonomy and trust has been a bit of a theme of your 2025 too.
I think it's something that's grown over time. You know, if you think about, like you said, there's a link between flexibility and autonomy, and that overriding message of trust. In the past, I look at, you know, my previous employer and across the sector, it was very traditional, clock in, clock out. And through a moment of trust, the business decided we don't need to do that anymore. Why do we do that? There was no badge logging or anything like that. And then I think COVID acted as almost like a autonomy catalyst, because, like you said, suddenly you're in a world where I can't be with my colleagues. I can't go into the office. I can't do these things. And so the business had no choice but to adapt to that rapid changing culture or to react. And I think some businesses are trying to shake away that autonomy that was given to employees during that period, and some employers are embracing it. You know, my team, for example, are fully remote. That gives us an opportunity that when we hired, you know, recruiters into this business, into this team, we had the best talent pool in the world. We could go anywhere we wanted. We weren't constrained by all of these restrictions on locations because there's an inbuilt culture of trust. And I think autonomy ultimately allows for creative and diverse thinking. If you want to make an impact on inclusion and diversity, it all comes back to trust and autonomy.
And measuring the right things, right? I think that also we've seen this big shift in terms of abandoning badge logging and actually going to looking at outcomes, looking at what people are delivering, rather than presenteeism being used.
Exactly. I mean, if you work better, you know, later in the evening and that suits you, well, that suits you. If you prefer to go to the gym at 3 o'clock in the morning, then come into the office for a few hours, then do a yoga class, and that works for you because that's how you work best, then great. And I think the more we can embrace the benefits of each individual and trust that these individuals can operate in the best possible way, then businesses will just grow.
Yeah.
You have to, so it's a moment for businesses to say, I let go and I trust my people.
But that letting go of control, I think, is something that obviously is very alien to a lot of leaders, where they carved their careers in in-person cultures where presenteeism meant you were working hard. The more you came in and the longer you were sitting at your desk meant the more committed you were. And it's a very alien concept, I think, to start to think about moving away from the idea of presenteeism as a proxy. But I hope that it continues through 2026, because I do think we made a lot of progress on it in 25. Miranda, I would love to hear your thoughts on whether you saw those kind of themes of autonomy and trust appearing more this year than you have before.
Absolutely. So Merlin's gone through a really big period of change, and we have lean structures. And so for me, I think autonomy is so important because it changes how work feels for everybody. And that's the most important thing. So we can't always flex the location, but we can definitely flex how you choose to work. So I have an amazing team that works alongside me. I will never be the expert in everything that they're able to do. So to have that trust that they're going to deliver the job really well, and we'll collaborate together to get the job done, that ultimately drives business performance, which you know means we exceed our KPIs, which means we bring in awesome talent to the business. And I think the more people that can get on board with that mindset change really drives better results for your business.
And I think it's such a huge pull for talent that knows that autonomy matters more for them, because there's more than two camps. This is a massive generalization, but there are often people that thrive in a bit more ambiguity, having more freedom, having more trust. And there's people that thrive more with structure, with routine, with traditional hierarchies.
I think our values is, you know, owning your craft, and it's so important. Like, we bring you in as an expert for you to deliver your craft and be soulfully curious within that and deliver performance. So I think it's important.
And the fact that you're clear about it, I think, means you're naturally going to attract that aligned talent, right? And I think it becomes increasingly important for companies to talk more openly about exactly what they offer, the kind of cultures that they have. I think we've got work-life balance versus work-life integration, whether it is structured and routine versus autonomous and you have loads of freedom and it is going to be about making your own rule. Like those different environments, just picking those two examples, will attract entirely different talent that will thrive in the right one, but might end up feeling completely stuck in another one. And so I think there's a massive opportunity for companies to be very clear about exactly what it is that they offer. I'd love to come on to probably the second biggest theme that we've seen in the data over the last 12 months. And this is across all user groups, which is particularly fascinating. But what we've seen is that this trend has been strongest in parents, probably unsurprisingly, where we have seen at the same time as a decrease in the relative importance of just pure salary. So when we say salary, we mean above market salary. So an excellent salary being a huge pull. And so there's been a bit of a decrease in importance in parents specifically, but at the same time, we've seen a huge spike in interest, and I'll tell you exactly the figure, for alternative working patterns. So demand for compressed hours is up 83%. Demand for job sharing is up 66%, and demand for part-time work is up 39%. And now that is not just across women, that is across men as well. And actually the relative change, the relative increase has been greater in men than it has been in women, obviously lower base. But that demand for alternative working patterns, I think, signals that it's being driven by this tension that a lot of people are experiencing between trying to balance their home lives, increased caring responsibilities, which obviously over time, as we have an aging population, is only going to get more intense and more obvious. And the same with cost of living crisis, where it's just becoming much more unmanageable to have only one person working in a household. So there's obviously this desire and this juggle to try to make things work. And I think a lot of companies have a little bit of a hesitation to talk about being open to part-time or open to compressed hours or open to job sharing, because it feels like, oh God, do I have to then offer that for every single role? And I know that all of you in different ways have embraced alternative working patterns at different businesses. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Mark, first of all, like your reflections on the industry. Aerospace and defense, not somewhere you would associate with alternative working patterns, but I know that you've obviously seen it happen. So I'd love to get your reflections.
Yeah, it's a common misconception that aerospace is quite rigid, and you can imagine it. You know, it's an assembly line. It's typically factories, but I love this fact. Flexible working was invented by aerospace. In the 1960s, Messerschmitt introduced flexible working to prevent all of these cars arriving in the car park at the same time. So they offered overlapping shifts, and so that's kind of evolved over time. But yeah, I've seen some amazing cases. I've seen my people partner at Airbus was a job share, and they've been doing it together for over 10 years. Moving their career together and growing together, which I think is a fantastic story. My wife works part-time, 4 days a week as well as an engineer, and I was lucky enough to be part of the trial of a 9-day fortnight as well in my previous role. I was really surprised by how open the sector is to these alternative working patterns. And I think you need to be, when talent is scarce for these specific roles, you're willing to say, well, okay, what can we do to open up this talent pool a little bit wider? And in a lot of cases, by offering a role as part-time or a job share or a 9-day fortnight or compressed hours, you can find that there's a much wider available pool of people. And often that pool is also a little bit more diverse. We see a larger percentage of female applicants when we offer these kind of roles. So I think it's win-win for the business, and I would love to see more of them.
I think particularly in industries where there are pockets of businesses where it has to be in person all the time. There is no ability to work from home, whether that is building planes, whether that's obviously in the entertainment industry where people have to be in person, same within supply chain and warehousing. It's a brilliant way to offer a level of flexibility as well as obviously flexible shift patterns in an industry that otherwise might struggle to attract talent that needs some form of flexibility. Miranda, I would love to come to you and hear your thoughts on alternative working patterns and, whether it's worked for Merlin Entertainments and the kind of results you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super important. I'm a single mom myself. I've got 2 children. I do work full time, but I completely empathise with individuals that need to be able to do that balance. So within our seasonal space, we have a variety of different roles that you can go after that are part-time, all different kinds of setups. And I guess within Merlin, we do aim to be the most flexible employer that we can be. Within my own team, I've got individuals that work compressed hours. One of them's just messaged me now. They're off to a school play and they'll be back to work later. And that's absolutely fine. As long as the work is delivered in a way that it's, driving business performance, I think we should be really open to any kind of different working pattern. And it's something within the intake meetings that we do or business alignment meetings where we look at what are the options. So as we start to source candidates, either internally or externally, we're giving everybody an opportunity to go for that role.
Absolutely. And I think it does really level the playing field in terms of really understanding what people might have in terms of circumstances at home, and then being able to then create a working environment where everybody is able to thrive. And ultimately, you are going to get better performance out of people.
Definitely.
Rather than seeing a way of working of going into the office 5 days a week and working X or Y patterns as being the challenge or the threshold at which you are then seen as being committed.
Absolutely.
Chris, I'd love your reflections on Mars and your approach to alternative working patterns, if you've seen an increase this year or if it's been a positive thing for you to embrace.
I think it's definitely a positive thing. Now, at Mars, we have a really unique business. We're kind of split into the supply and demand side. So supply side, very factory focused, and in our veterinary health business as well, vets and nurses in hospitals. And it's really key there because it is one lever of flexibility we can pull. I think you've all kind of talked about it, and I think uniquely we're all in companies which do have this kind of crossover of both worlds as well, needing an in-person as well as a virtual or flexible setup. The key for me with this and why it's successful, and Mark, you mentioned 2 things which are so important. One, it opens up far more of the talent market, and that is, it just is one of those points for me that you just go, okay, so I can get X% of the talent market more. There are roles which we find really difficult to hire for whatever reason. If I can open up another 2, 3, 4% of the talent market, amazing. And it's not that anyone's less talented or less able, they just have blockers which stop them being able to do this normal kind of, and normal quote unquote 9 to 5. We're saying that's normal based on 100 years of corporate history. It's not normal. And the second thing, Mark, you said, but Miranda, you kind of talked about as well, is that we all work differently. If I was forced to, my working hours are technically 8:30 to 4:30. I don't even know what my working hours are actually, but I think technically it's contracted around that. I am not someone that's going to do really creative work at 8:30 in the morning. I'm someone that loves to get all of my daily life stuff done, log on and have creative work at 8, 9 p.m. at night, and that's when I thrive. I know people that have similar things, and I'm a massive advocate for this kind of compressed hours and part-time piece in particular, because we're offering the ability for people to live their lives. And so I think, Molly, you'd mentioned it's working mum. So there's someone in my team who works compressed hours, and what that enables her to do is twofold. One is save a day's worth of nursery, and now I don't know how much that is, but I hear it's a lot of money. And 2, it just allows her to spend more time with her daughter, which is something she will never get back. And it's a lever that no other organization can pull. It's not a benefit we can give in that sense. And the second part as well is my wife compresses her hours in her job, and then the 1 day a week she gets off enables her to go and do a hobby she loves to do, which she just wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And the joy that brings her is invaluable. it's not anything which in any way, shape or form affects the work. When you, Miranda, you mentioned it, when you look at this, does the work get done? Yes. Okay, cool. That's it. We're not going to look at the presentee element of it. We're not going to look at badge swiping. If it gets done, who are we to question the method in which it gets done?
Yeah, and I think that's been a consistent theme of obviously this discussion, but also if we look back at a lot of the data is people wanting more freedom, wanting to be judged on performance and not on, you know, presenteeism and location. And I do hope that that genuinely continues. We've talked a lot about kind of individualism and different people wanting different things. Obviously, we've talked about the idea of culture being important to some people. Gen Z have a higher tolerance for the office. You know, I think it can often feel quite overwhelming when we talk to employer brand, recruitment marketing and talent acquisition teams about all of these individual wants and needs. And you obviously can't be everything to everyone as an organization. So I suppose, how do you handle the idea that Gen Z could care about one thing, but senior women in leadership could care about another thing, and engineers could care about a different thing? How do you handle that in your talent acquisition and employer branding? Miranda, I would love to come to you first.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think for me, the biggest piece of it is understanding the persona that you're trying to get after. So what is the talent market and what does that persona need? I think if you don't understand the persona, then you've lost the battle in terms of being able to recruit. I think gone are the days of just posting and praying on LinkedIn and hoping maybe a promoted job slot on Indeed might help you get where you need to be. So for us, we segment against the areas that we're really well known for and how we go to market with those. And then the areas that I call our purple squirrels. So tech isn't an area we're really well known for. So we need to understand that persona, where they live, what they like to do, how they like to receive content, so that we're able to then create an attraction strategy that's really going to help them engage. And then how we change the story of what Merlin looks like so it's exciting and it's appealing for them. And the same things that will appeal to that market won't potentially appeal to, you know, my HR and my creative team. So for us, it's around not one size fits all. Obviously, we've got the story that we want to tell and how we create dates of the brand, but then segmenting the market to where we need to get talent that we might not be known for and how do we go out and tender for that. And that's where, for me, personas are so important to understand what that looks like so we can get a better handle on how we go out. Another thing that we're looking at is reward and benefits. So again, not that kind of one size fits all, but again, looking at the market and the needs, what do other competitors do? And therefore for 26, how do we maybe need to change and shape what our benefits look like for those roles?
Nice. And it's great that you've also got the ability to flex and adapt. I think a lot of
I think that's so important. I think that if you're just going out with a post and pray on a basic job description, you're not going to get where you need to get to.
Completely agree. Chris, what's Mars's approach to all of the different wants and needs of the candidate market?
Yeah, this one's a really interesting one, and for two reasons. One, because it's my bread and butter. It's literally what my team is formed to do in rec marketing is target individuals and personas. But two, because Mars is so broad.
Yeah.
At any one point, we're hiring a dog walker, we're hiring a factory worker, we're hiring data scientists. We can't be everything for everyone. And I think it's about building a culture shift in TA. And quite often EVP is looked at as a sales tool. So your EVP is what you go out, and it's a sales tool, but it's not only a sales tool. It's grounded in who you are, and it's what makes you unique as an organization. And I think when you go out thinking your EVP is just a sales tool, that's when you kind of throw everything. And so we might go people purpose development. It's everything to everyone. We're trying to be everything to everyone. What we're actually trying to do is appear in front of the right people at the right time with the right message. And so saying that, you know, I'm very open on webinars and public speaking when I do it. My job is not to make everyone want to work for Mars. It's to make the right people want to work for Mars. And not everyone will love their career at Mars. I've been here 8 years. I love what I do. I love the culture, but not everyone has that. There are people that love what they do in places that I have absolutely despised working. I look at them today and I'm like, how do you like that? But we're all different people, aren't we?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's around with personas is understanding what the group of talent's looking for, but also understanding that or crafting a message which is honest about that area. So yes, we might not hire a lot of data scientists, and the example I always use is we're not going to be able to offer the same salaries to a data scientist as a Meta or a Google. But what we can offer is the work you're going to do. I don't know anything about data science, so hopefully I'm not butchering this, but the work you're going to come and do and the data you're going to work on will lead to end pet homelessness, or it's gonna work on pet foods which genuinely change the scene of pet nutrition. So there's a real purpose. So what we're trying to do is build a message which appeals to you, and then be honest about what we're trying to deliver.
Yeah, I completely agree that an employer brand should put off as many people, if not more people, than it attracts. Mark, I would love to hear how you handle all of the, I'm sure, multivariate personas within aerospace and defence.
Well, first of all, I love what Chris said. It's right people, right time, right message. That is absolutely the name of the game. And in my experience, when you're building out an employer branding strategy, you got to do four things. You've got to have a really clear objective from your business. You need to know who the audience is. You then got to build content or take content that's off the shelf to fit with that audience. You're then defining your channel mix, and then you've got to find a way to measure it. If you've got those 5 things, you've got a strategy. If you don't, you don't have a strategy. You won't be here next year. One of the key elements of that in the work that I've been doing with our EVP is around programmatic search and social, programmatic job boards as well. So that means we're going after the audience where they are with the message that would most resonate with them. And I love this example of, if you took King Charles and Ozzy Osbourne, sadly no longer with us, but both of them born in 1948, both British, both lived in castles, both pretty wealthy. So do I give them both the same message based on that demographic? No, probably not. So cognitive profiling, I think, is a probably the next level. Not to say that psychographics should be used in everything, but I think behavioral messaging will be probably the next trend to enable ultra targeted campaigning for employer branding.
Yeah, and I think to draw on that point, I think also using other things as a proxy for targeting. Like, obviously we know that loads of companies do want to increase their ability to attract great tech talent, but they're not the Googles, they're not the OpenAIs, they're not the Metas. Just the same as the absolute dream is to be able to attract more women in engineering or more women into genuine senior leadership, but you can't target by demographic. So understanding, and Miranda, to your point of making sure that you hyper understand that persona so that you can say, okay, well, I know that these are the things that tech talent really cares about, or this is the thing that women in senior leadership or female engineers really care about. So you can target them by what they want and by what they say they need, therefore being able to get to them much more easily without having to do blanket targeting, I think is going to become super powerful as well. Now, before we move on to questions, and just a reminder to the audience, please do drop in any questions at all that you have, and we will endeavour to answer them all. I would love to whiz around our panel and get your predictions for one prediction for 2026 that you think is going to happen within the talent market, similar to what we started on around, obviously, massive volume, increase in graduate interest. What do you think your kind of primary theme is for 2026? Chris, I would love to come to you.
I'm going to cop out on this slightly. I'm going to give a similar answer to one I've given on a Flexa webinar before, because I think maybe it's not happened as quickly as I first predicted, but we will, I can save myself with this, we will continue to move towards a world in which people understand that we work to live, not live to work. And so our needs, our preferences, the way we do things will adapt. And one of those things may be that we, as a people, sometimes have to give in and give up what we think are nice to haves, but for the real must haves. And I think we'll continue to do things like that, but really understanding that I am alive not solely to work, but to build, whatever I want to be.
Nice. Mark, what is your prediction for 2026?
Great question. I'm going to go with the old classic AI one.
Yeah.
That was going to be mine.
in fact, I'll be more specific, because I think we hear AI everything every day. AI flavored cornflakes will be next, but I think the concept of search engine optimization is beginning to tail off, and I think traditional job boards, I'm sorry to say, my dear friends, Indeed, if you're watching, I think traditional job boards like Indeed will struggle unless they move with the times. If you're relying on SEO, game's over, and you need to be thinking more along a generative engine optimization model, and having that strategy in place is key, because that relies on the sentiment and perception towards your brand. And so what we're seeing is a lot more applications coming from these platforms, coming from Claude, coming from Gemini, etc. Traditional job boards are going to have to adapt to that. I think that's a growing trend.
Totally agree. And we spotted that about 4 months ago. And over the last 3 months, we've seen traffic from LLMs to Flexa increase by 697%. So it is something that we're very aware of. And you're completely right in the sense that soon it will completely subsume SEO.
AIEO doesn't have the same as it is when of McDonald.
I don't know who named it. I do think GEO is a bit better. Miranda, I would love to hear your prediction for 2026.
Yeah, I think, again, AI, maybe not necessarily in the hiring market. I do agree with programmatic advertising, that kind of Amazon basket of targeting and getting in front of the right people. I think AI supporting recruiters to get through the vast volume of applications they get, and how we can drive some speed and efficiency in that, and the personalization that can come from that will definitely be a trend for next year. And then I think skills, not everywhere is looking at that, but I think skills assessment is something that will continue to be at the forefront of reviewing traditional methods of applications and interviews, and looking at more of a more blended approach that's inclusive of everybody in how we assess talent.
Nice. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think from my perspective, my prediction for 2026 is this leaning much more into the idea of a company's culture, working environment, benefits being genuinely unique. I think if we look back pre-2020, there was a little bit of a reluctance to be transparent. I think there was a bit of a misconception that by saying, oh, we've got these benefits, we've got this culture, people would come along and almost take the piss. And they'd be like, I'm definitely only coming into that company because they've got great mat leave. That's definitely not the case. It is a very arduous process to be able to go and get a job just for the sake of one benefit. And I think companies, through having to talk about their approach to location flexibility, it has sort of quietened that worry a little bit more, and they've managed to dip their toe into being clearer about exactly what is on offer at a company. But I think as we go back to this consistent war for brilliant talent, whether that is tech talent, whether that is senior leadership talent, whether that is brilliant diverse talent, companies are going to have to differentiate themselves. And not every company can be in the top 10% from a job seeker demand basis. But what you can be is in the top 10% for the personas that you really care about, depending on what you offer. And so I think what we're going to end up with is much more of a leaning into describing cultures in detail. And that may well be polarizing, but that's probably a good thing. Saying this is a place where we don't have great work-life balance, but we do have all of these things. Or we do have great work-life balance, but we don't have these other things. And being super clear and super targeted so that you can win the war for the talent that you actually want. And I hope that we see some really creative ideas. Like we just on Flexa added, we've got all of these descriptors of culture, the usual ones, your supportive, your traditional, your fast-paced, and we recently just added unhinged. And so far it's only Flexa on there. So if there are any companies listening that are under the unhinged filter, you're very welcome to join. But things like that, I think, are going to start to appear much more. And I think EVPs and employer brands will start to genuinely feel like they have more personality. We got very carried away with discussion. So obviously with questions, we have got a very short amount of time. So we'll do a little bit of like a quick fire question round where I'll get a question and then pick someone on the panel that I think is best placed to answer that. So the first question is, in 2026, what's the best way for candidates to approach job searching, especially when the candidate has clear non-negotiable requirements such as flexible hours, predominantly remote work, etc.? Chris, I would love to come to you for your view on
that. One thing is looking at platforms like Flexa. I feel like I almost can't say that, but is understanding what your non-negotiables are and being really honest with yourself and kind of almost putting yourself in the scenario of saying, right, if this doesn't exist or I can't get this, would I take this job, whatever that may be, and having your 2 to 3 clear requirements, and then searching in the honest places, the places that back it up. And the reason I mentioned Flexa is because it's a third party source and it's genuine associate or employee data. And so those sources, when you're not just going to Mars's LinkedIn page, but you're hearing from, I can't remember how many thousands of Mars associates that do the Flexa survey, that's the genuine truth. So really understanding what it is you're looking for, and then go to places where you get the wider voice and the wider truth.
And I promise Chris isn't being paid for mentions. So then the second question, and Miranda, I'd love to come to you to answer this one. Do you think it becomes harder for employers to trust and give employees autonomy, considering increasing cost pressures, organizational commitments to shareholders, stakeholders, etc.?
I don't think it becomes harder for employees to trust. I think it's around being honest around what that's going to look like, and if it's going to work within your organization, and if it's not, why it wouldn't. I think from what we've seen in Merlin, it absolutely does work. And so I think it's around looking at what are the business results that need to be delivered, and ensuring that's really clear in the outset, and then allowing your employees to own their craft in terms of how they deliver that.
Brilliant. And final question. What is the biggest assumption you had about the talent market in 2024 that got proved wrong in 2025? Mark, I'd love to come to you on that one.
Classic AI one. When all of these tools magically appeared overnight in kind of 2022, 23, I thought in 2024, oh my God, they're going to replace us. They're going to replace recruitment. That all of these AIs will be the future, and the reality is there hasn't been a single player that's come out on top. We've got LinkedIn hiring assistant, we see inbuilt tools within CRMs and things like that to do scheduling, but there is no one solid player yet, I think, at the top of that pile. Maybe there will be in the future. I won't name some names here, but I think that proved me wrong. And I think it is a constant evolution. I don't think we'll see anything massively evolve in 2025. It could be another few years before it's really a game-changing piece of technology.
And I think also, to come back to Miranda's point of skills, I think ultimately one of the big skills that will come through that AI cannot replace is around management. So I think that what we see as traditional management will move to being like, yes, getting the most out of your people, but also being able to augment that with AI and get the most out of AI while also doing it. So I think, are we going to see the end of recruitment, employer brand and talent attraction? Absolutely not, but it probably will, I think, change significantly as tools and ability to augment soft skills with AI get better. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for all of your time. It was a brilliant discussion. Hopefully you as the audience found that really engaging, and I'm sorry that we didn't get through all of your questions. What we often do after an event like this is we'll produce some content. We will try to cover as many of those questions as possible in blog content that helps with AREO. So please do check back on Flexa and you will be able to see your questions answered. But thank you so much for sparing an hour to spend with us and listen to our experts. And thank you to our experts.